Hello, AWE. There's so many people here I love and admire. Thank you all for coming to my talk. Why open wins? Namaste. My name is Ben Erwin, which is an anagram for web inner. We're about 30 miles from UCLA, where the first message were sent between two computers. And 16 hours later, on the island of Manhattan, I was born. And that really isn't that relevant to this talk, other than I've dedicated my entire career to the web. So first, the disclaimers. I'm not representing anyone but myself here. This presentation contains copyrighted content that is under fair use with dramatic and satirical effect and educational purposes. I am not compensated for this talk, and the original content of this talk is open source. Open standards, they're all around us. They penetrate us. They bind the galaxy together. But when we think of open standards, we think they're a digital area thing. But in fact, things like the Gregorian calendar and the metric system and alphabets and alternating current, the periodic table, the QWERTY keyboard, they're all sort of analog versions of open standards that we're very used to and we rely upon to run the world. But takeout containers are a perfect example of what life is like without standards and interoperability. If you've ever tried to put your leftovers away and you have a drawer full of takeout containers where the lids aren't matched and you're trying to find your food, that is an analogous analog example of life without standards and interoperability. But I'm here to talk about why open wins. Why does open win? It seizes market share. When it wins big, and it gives developers and creators agency. It creates opportunities for others, and it encourages cooperation. Sometimes closed wins. And it has hold on, I'm skipping around here. It creates opportunities for others and encourages cooperation. And sometimes closed wins. When closed wins, you might not be able to, say, do a native video call between two phones with different operating systems, or send a text message over Wi-Fi, or manage your files selectively without a third-party plugin, or have an aftermarket accessories like charging cables that work without an impediment. And I'm tough-loving at you, Apple. But because I seldom have 3 Apple devices far from my reach, and inevitably one day I'll have an Apple headset device, it really doesn't dampen my criticism of their deliberate choice to not be interoperable, trying to create lock-in in ways that are really not helpful. But there's no good reason why all those features I just mentioned shouldn't be our right. So just as we take standards for granted, we notice when they are not followed. And so, talk about a abundance mindset. Open versus proprietary is sort of a abundance versus scarcity mindset. And when open wins, it wins big. In today's talk, I'm going to go back in history, and we're going to talk about the open protocols of what I call Web 0, the days before the World Wide Web. And how the web was won is, in fact, when the World Wide Web was put into the public domain. And there are a lot of different examples I'm going to show, including Git, the Open APIs, the Kronos group, and I'm going to talk about the tragedy of Flash, as I always do. If anybody knows my talk, I always throw in something about Flash. But if you're a startup that needs to choose between building an open or a closed stack, I've got some stories for you and some case studies that might help light the way. And in the context of elucidating the history of the open web, I hope to highlight some lessons we can take with us into the metaverse. So, Ben, why are you so passionate about interoperability and standards? Well, frankly, because I wish I had embraced this philosophy sooner. Moreover, I see the spatial computing ecosystem ignoring the lessons of the early days of the internet. And what this talk means personally to me is a couple of things. First, I spent the aughts, aka the 2000s, building a proprietary CMS. And the first part of that using a proprietary programming language called Fusion. But clients didn't want to pay for the license, so we rebuilt it in PHP and MySQL, which are open. My CMS published some of the first content manage multilingual sites at the UN, but even then, I couldn't compete with open source, and ultimately, in 2009, I went with WordPress. Second, in the same decade, I became a highly proficient Flash developer, and you know what happened there. Third, I missed the opportunity to grow community around the software, thinking that I could go it alone, when I could have made my code open source and still made good money supporting it, but ultimately I became an expert in WordPress, which won because of its openness. So because of my closed-minded approach to software development, I didn't build community and my efforts didn't scale, and I made some poor choices when I selected my stack. So standing here before you today with that cautionary tale as a way to giving back the open source community that's given me so much and given the world so much. So Web 0, the open protocols. Could I get some audio, please? Okay. Well, that was the architect of the Matrix, Sigmund Freud. Oh wait, hold on. Sorry, that was Vint Cerf. That was a Freudian slip, excuse me. Cerf, along with Bob Kahn at ARPANET, developed the open protocol, TCP/IP, which is the foundation that the very internet that we use today is founded on. And I know what you're thinking. That's not where the expression surfing the web came from. Hey, Dali, give me an image of Vint Cerf hanging 10 with, on a wave of zeros and ones. So I really, really need audio. Dude. Well, the parts that are coming, I can't not have the audio because that's the whole point.
Let's take it back to pre-93, when Tim Berners-Lee and the W3C set the web free eternally by imbuing it with interoperability. Let's take it back.
It was proposed to me that we should bring it into the public domain. Most people will agree that was the source of the success of the World Wide Web.
That is the voice of the guy who made he's not Tim Berners-Lee, he was Tim Berners-Lee's boss's boss, actually. So beyond the World Wide Web, the browser became the universal client, which I think the most important thing, you know, I talk a lot about WebXR, but the thing that really matters is the backwards compatibility. You know, we always see cases where software products don't last and they don't reset, they break, frankly. And the web and the browser as the universal client really helps that out. Git. Now, I think that probably the most interesting piece of research that I found out that I didn't know was that the origin of Git, Linus Torvalds, who thought that Linux should, or Unix should be free, wrote the Linux kernel by himself and thus started Linux, which is the third and open source operating system. But that in itself is a case study, but like many companies like Red Hat have made a profitable business off of Linux, which is a great model of how open source makes money. But what's really interesting about Git is that Linus did it because they changed the license on the BitKeeper software, so he wrote what then became the gold standard of version control. And I'm going to just kind of cut through the connectivity standards here, but we have the logos here of the connectivity standards for wired and for wireless.
Thunderbolt and lightning, very, very frightening.
Oh yeah, Thunderbolt and lightning, not open source. So OpenXR is actually exhibiting here. OpenXR is a layer that allows browsers to talk to, or actually allows the device to talk to the metal. And so that's the baseline layer, and then you put things on top of that, such as Chromium and WebXR, and you're able to build immersive experiences. And why WebXR is so important, and why I have this graphic, and there are many I could have chosen, but I have always thought that this explains so much about fragmentation. And fragmentation is where you have all of these different things that all have to have separate builds for separate platforms. But what OpenXR solves for is it's one API to rule them all, and you're able to pump all of these, publish to all of these device platforms using one, and that saves developers a lot of time and money, and that goes back up the food chain and delivers a lot of value. So I think it's really important to also understand that's the difference between OpenXR and WebXR. It's actually at the bottom of the same stack. I'm not going to spend time on this slide, but this is just an illustration of how many open licenses there are, and they're actually ranked in order of permissiveness. And Julie?
In the early days, we rushed to get audio, video, and animation on the web. We used authoring tools that don't exist anymore, that only worked on players that don't exist anymore, and as a result, that content doesn't exist anymore. And with it, the investments in that content, in the skills it took to create it, and its legacy, all went away too.
Need I say more? I couldn't have mimed that one. I shall now read from the book of Job. From the late 90s, Macromedia's plugin made now the quaint term rich media available on the web years before it was open standards, and it became a juggernaut. And Macromedia was acquired by Adobe in 2005, and at its peak, Flash dominated by being on 75% of the world's websites. This displeased Lord Jobs, who felt that the web should be open. And when the iPhone came out in 2007, iOS did not support Flash. And it wasn't until the iPad came out that Adobe began to cry aloud, "It's pleased Jobs, why hath thee forsaken me?"
We just decided not to use one of their products in our platform. You know, they started to say a lot of bad things about us in the press and this and that. It went on for months. We didn't think it was a matter for the press. And we finally just said, enough is enough. We're tired of these guys trashing us in the press over this. And so we wrote down the reasons why, technically, we didn't choose Flash. And Flash looks like a technology that had its day, but is waning.
And lo, it came to pass that the self-fulfilling prophecy came true. Jobs had smote Flash with a deathly blow, and Flash had lost its market share as fast as it once gained it. I had a chart here. This has actually turned out to be the story of open winning, because Jobs, in fact, embraced the native web support for audio and video, and in the end, Jobs did us all a favor by ripping the Band-Aid off. And he was right, because the web should be driven by open standards. But with great hypocrisy comes great irony. And HTML5 video, which he extolled, is not really a thing. It is, in fact, a tag that supports .mp4 and .webm standards. But H.264 is a licensed codec, and it's not going to be out of patent for another 3 years. And HEVC, its successor, is not going to be out for another 9 years. And they both have their rivals, but they're not really very widely supported. And Apple does not support the rival codec. Lamentations.
As the memories of proprietary dependencies ebb, remember, a decade of content was expunged from the web.
So, why do my lamentations about Flash matter? They matter because the web lost a decade of history. And because Flash players were removed from browsers, the Wayback Machine is filled with an archive sites that you can't see because a proprietary player is dead. The painful lesson that echoes today, that the entire ecosystem, the alt space community, could be rug pulled with no remorse. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but gaming engines with proprietary runtimes are today's Flash. That's my opinion. The future deserves to have 3D content created today to still be playable in 20 years. And even if it sucks by comparison to what's possible in 2044, this history deserves to be preserved. And all the work today's creators put in and all the money that gets invested in it deserves to be preserved. Thank you. So here's a story of resurrection, if you will. This was a where were you moment on just a little under 4 years ago when Mozilla laid off 250 people, and they had like 9 WebXR projects that were all brilliant and distinct and had purpose and a future. And they just made this short-sighted decision to lay off this entire workforce, which is especially sad because Mozilla is an open source company. But what was really important about that was Firefox Reality was one of their products. And Firefox Reality died with that. All of its IP got moved into Hub's cloud. And at the end of 2021, a company called Igalia picked up the repo for Firefox Reality and created Wolvik, which is not only the only open source immersive browser, it's also the only browser that is only immersive. It doesn't have a version for desktop and mobile. So this is a beautiful thing. This is sort of a requiem for what happened with AltSpace, is we found out in February that Hubs 2 was going to be discontinued. Hubs Cloud, where they had moved all of the IP over, it wasn't profitable, so they had to make the tough decision to cut it. But Hubs had built such a large community, and Hubs, being open source, a couple of weeks ago I started seeing tweets, "We'll take it from here." A Canadian foundation is now going to take over Hubs. So can we give it up for the Hubs Foundation? That's the story of open winning right there. So yeah, Ethereal Engine. This one made me really happy. I've been following Liam and his team's work for years, and I was always really impressed with the fact that it was MIT licensed. And recently, in February, it was announced that they were acquired at a valuation of $75 million for a company that is valued at $2.4 billion on an open source project, mind you. So for all the startups out there that are doing, $3 million Series A funding, and look at this. This is a North Star. And one thing that I found particularly interesting was that it used to be MIT licensed. It's now CPL licensed, which is nuanced, but they did change the licensing on that, but it is still open. So I'm going into my conclusion here. Automatic is another amazing example of a company. Mullenweg started WordPress in 2003, and in 2006 he started Automatic, which owns WordPress.com, Jetpack, WooCommerce, and other plugins. It is privately held, and it is valued at $7.5 billion. It is an envied company to work for if you can get hired at it. In 2021, they did a $275 million stock buyback, and they have a program, Five for the Future, where they contribute 5% of their resources to WordPress. Now, WordPress is the juggernaut, and these numbers just blow my mind. And this one I just added right before this and I said, hey, ChatGPT, what's the value of the entire WordPress ecosystem? Plugins, themes, developers, hosting, $635 billion for an open. Now that's a win, but they also look at this slope. We saw the Flash slope come off, but look at that, 64% of the market share, and it's still ascending. 43% of all the sites on the web, and it's open. And I leave you with this quote that was actually said to me personally by Patrick Cozy. He said, "I would rather grow the pie and take a smaller slice of it than try to own the pie." And I was like, wow, that's really profound. And CCM open sources all of its software, and it licenses its API. And it's an example because it has endured all of the downturn in economics. We've had layoffs and the way the economy's gone. Meanwhile, Cesium is thriving and hiring based on this philosophy. So Cesium also, or the Polys honored Patrick Cozy with a Lifetime Achievement Award at the third Polys, and Cesium sponsored the fourth Polys, and I couldn't be more happy about that because of our alignment with their philosophy. So why embrace open? My friends, we've come to the end, and before you go forth and build the metaverse, I leave you with this final thought. You have a choice of what technologies you use. Open standards and open source constitutes a significant portion of the digital ecosystem, and many of the largest projects are governed by nonprofit foundations, including Linux, Mozilla, and Apache. Open source has been a quiet but potent economic driver since the dawn of computing, and open is a mindset of abundance, and you can too. Today, I've shared with you many examples in the hope that you will win too. Thank you all for being here from the bottom of my heart. If I could ask one quick favor, I would love a shot of this audience that isn't a silhouette. So if everybody could stand up and turn around, and Rolando, if you could take the picture from the back, I would love that. Thank you all for coming.